There is a structure standing in the desert outside Cairo that should not exist. Not should not exist as a dramatic line, not as a metaphor. I mean it in the most literal, unsettling sense possible. It should not exist as a problem of physics, a problem of mathematics, a problem of engineering, or even a problem of time itself. Because what rises from the Giza plateau is not just a monument. It is a contradiction. We are talking about roughly 3 million stone blocks, each weighing anywhere from 2 to 15 tons, assembled into a colossal mountain of stone that reaches 481 feet into the sky. But the real shock is not the scale. It is the precision. In some places, the joints are so tight you cannot slide a sheet of paper between the blocks. Pause on that. A structure this massive is already extraordinary. A structure this massive built with this level of exactness becomes something else entirely. For nearly 4,000 years, it stood as the tallest thing human hands had ever built. Nothing on Earth came close. No cathedral, no tower, no palace, no empire's grandest achievement ever matched it. And the closer you study it, the less it feels like history, and the more it feels like a riddle. In 2024, an artificial intelligence was given a question that sounds simple, but is anything but. Who built the pyramids? Not the polished textbook answer. Not the version everyone has already heard 1,000 times. The system was fed something no human researcher has ever truly had in one place. Every measurement, every survey, every geological scan, every astronomical alignment, every engineering tolerance ever recorded about the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Then it was given one instruction. Ignore loyalty to any theory. Ignore tradition. Ignore comfort. Look only at the numbers and report what they say. And the answer it gave was not a name. Not a date. Not a neat explanation that closed the case. It was something much stranger. Because the machine began doing what real analysis does best. It started dismantling the story we have all been told since childhood, layer by layer, until the familiar explanation began to look far less certain than we were taught to believe. Now, to be fair, let us start with the standard account, because the standard account is not nonsense. It is not some lazy fantasy invented by people who never studied the evidence. It is a serious reconstruction built by archaeologists, historians, and engineers over more than a century of work. The accepted story says this. Around 2560 BCE, during the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt, Pharaoh Khufu ordered the construction of a tomb. Over roughly 20 years, tens of thousands of workers, not slaves in the movie sense, but organized crews of skilled laborers quarried limestone from the plateau, floated finer stone down the Nile, dragged the blocks across wetted sand on wooden sledges, and raised them into place using ramps, levers, ropes, and disciplined human labor. Their tools were simple by modern standards. Copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden mallets, cords, plumb lines, and basic measuring devices. Their methods were practical. Their organization was real. And the evidence is real too. Archaeologists have uncovered worker villages on the Giza plateau, complete with bakeries, breweries, barracks, cattle remains, and medical care for injured laborers whose healed bones show they were treated and valued. Administrative records written on papyrus describe the logistics of moving stone. Quarry marks, tool marks, and red ochre gang names have been found deep inside the structure. Crews labeled themselves with names like the Friends of Khufu. So yes, there is a mountain of human evidence here. The builders were real. The labor was real. The organization was real. And that matters, because if you are serious, you cannot dismiss the mainstream explanation as nonsense. It is not. For the broad question of who organized the work and why, the accepted story holds together remarkably well. But there is a problem. And the problem does not shrink when you look closer. It gets more disturbing. Because the story explains the workforce. It explains the food, the logistics, the tools, the names, the administration, the labor camps. What it does not fully explain is the precision. The official story tells us who moved the stones. It does not adequately explain how those stones were cut, fitted, leveled, and aligned to a standard that, in several measurable ways, still pushes against the limits of what we can achieve today with lasers, diamond saws, satellite positioning, and thousands of years of additional knowledge. That is where the real crack appears. Not the question of strength. The question of accuracy. Because strength is cheap. Time is patient. With enough workers, enough rope, and enough years, people can drag almost anything across the sand. But accuracy is different. Accuracy is not something you brute force. You cannot sweat your way to a fraction of a millimeter. You cannot muscle your way to a perfect alignment. Precision is not just effort. Precision is knowledge. And in the Great Pyramid, it is the precision that begins to behave strangely. When the AI began its analysis, it did not start with aliens, lost continents, or internet speculation. It started where any serious investigation should start, with the foundation. Is the ground level? That sounds almost too basic to matter. But in engineering, the simplest questions often expose the deepest truths. And the base of the Great Pyramid is not merely level. It is astonishingly level. Across a footprint stretching more than 230 meters on each side, the entire foundation is level to within just over 2 centimeters. 2 centimeters across the length of roughly 2.5 football fields. That is not pretty flat. That is not close enough. That is a flatness of roughly 0.0009%. Let that sink in. If you want to picture the scale, imagine a sheet of glass the size of a city block. Across that entire surface, the highest point and the lowest point differ by less than the width of 2 fingers. Now imagine that surface was not made in a factory, not laser leveled by modern instruments, but assembled from millions of individual stone blocks, some weighing as much as a small truck, trimmed and placed by hand. And imagine doing it with no modern precision tools. No laser level. No optical transit. No survey-grade theodolite. Just water in a trough, a wooden square, a plumb line, and the naked eye. The AI was asked a very narrow question. Given the tools the official record says were available, what is the probability that a crew could achieve this degree of flatness across this distance and keep it consistent across the whole structure? The answer was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was statistical. The machine called the result improbable. Not impossible. Improbable. Improbable. And that distinction matters. Because improbable means the outcome is far less likely than we instinctively assume. It means the builders were operating at a level of control that most people do not associate with ancient construction. And here is the part that makes it more uncomfortable. Modern construction does not usually demand this level of precision. When engineers pour a foundation today, the acceptable tolerance is often looser than what we find at Giza. A skyscraper can function perfectly well even if its base is off by a finger's width over a large span. The building still stands. The elevators still run. The structure still works. By modern standards, the Great Pyramid's foundation is around 10 times more precise than it has any practical reason to be. That is the question the floor raises. Why that level of accuracy for a structure we were told was only a tomb? Precision costs time. It costs labor. It costs remeasurement. It costs rejected stone. It costs patience, planning, discipline, and knowledge. A tomb does not need to be flat to within 0.009%. The dead are not concerned with slope. So the precision was either an accidental byproduct of extraordinary methods, or it was intentional. Either the builders could not help being this accurate, or they were trying to communicate something through the accuracy itself. The AI did not choose between those options yet. It simply noted the anomaly and moved on. Then it turned to orientation. And this is where the numbers get even harder to dismiss. The Great Pyramid is not just level. It is aligned. Its 4 sides face true north, true south, true east, and true west with extraordinary accuracy. The deviation from true north is on the order of 3 arc minutes. That may sound tiny, but scale matters. 1 degree contains 60 arc minutes. A full circle contains 21,600 arc minutes. And across that vast span, the Great Pyramid misses true north by only about 3. You would never see that with the naked eye. You would barely feel it. You would need instruments to detect it at all. And true north is not the north shown by a compass. A compass points to magnetic north, which shifts over time. True north is geographic north, the axis the Earth actually turns on. You cannot point to it on the ground. You have to find it in the sky. You have to watch the stars wheel overhead and identify the invisible pivot around which the heavens seem to turn. Then you must transfer that celestial point down to the sand and hold it steady across a massive construction site without the line drifting. That is not random. That is not casual. That is not the kind of accuracy a civilization stumbles into by accident. It looks like deliberate astronomical observation, repeated measurement, and disciplined execution. To be fair, the idea that the ancient Egyptians used the sky to orient the pyramid is not outrageous. In fact, it is one of the more reasonable parts of the mainstream account. Ancient people were expert sky watchers. They tracked stars, seasons, and cycles with remarkable attention. But that still leaves the deeper question. Why this much precision? Because a tomb does not need to face true north with survey-grade accuracy. A monument to a king does not require an alignment so exact that even modern engineers respect it. A ceremonial structure does not need to be aimed with a precision that appears to exceed any practical use. The precision outruns the purpose. And when that happens, an investigator has to ask whether the precision itself was the purpose. That is where the next layer opens. Take the perimeter of the pyramid's base and compare it to its original height before the missing casing stones and capstone altered its appearance. The ratio comes out astonishingly close to 2 times pi. P is not just a random number. It is one of the most fundamental constants in mathematics, describing the relationship between a circle's circumference and its diameter. It is irrational, endless, unfinished. The conventional explanation says this may be an accident of measurement. If the Egyptians measured distances in one way and height in another, pi-like relationships could emerge naturally without anyone consciously writing the number down. That explanation is reasonable. But the machine was not looking for one pretty coincidence. It was looking at the full design. And it found that the relationship repeated in different places across the geometry, at independent points that do not collapse into the same simple explanation. One repetition can be coincidence. Repeated occurrence becomes pattern. And repeated pattern becomes something much harder to dismiss. Then the AI found something even stranger. The golden ratio. Phi. 618 and beyond, stretching forever. This ratio is famous for appearing in natural forms and aesthetically balanced designs. It shows up in shell spirals, tree branching, seed patterns, and shapes people often find pleasing, even if they do not know why. What makes its appearance in the Great Pyramid so striking is not that it appears once. It appears in multiple relationships. The AI found phi in the connection between height and base. It found it in the slope of the faces. It found it in internal geometry. It found it in at least 7 independent dimensional relationships. 7 separate places in the stone, where a proportion no one would formally describe in writing for more than 2,000 years, seems to be embedded in the structure. That is not easy to wave away. Because, unlike pi, phi is not something you accidentally stumble into through a measuring wheel. There is no simple tool that secretly produces the golden ratio by mistake. To use phi, it has to be understood. It has to be known. It has to be deliberately applied. Finding it in one place could be dismissed by a generous skeptic. Finding it in 7 makes that dismissal much harder. At that point, the question is no longer whether a coincidence exists. The question is whether the pattern was designed. And then comes the number that makes the whole thing feel even more impossible to ignore. 43,200. The AI took the original height of the pyramid and multiplied it by 43,200. The result matched the polar radius of the Earth to a margin that should not be possible by chance. Then it took the perimeter of the base and multiplied it by the same number. The result matched the Earth's equatorial circumference. Same multiplier. Two different dimensions of the pyramid. Two different dimensions of the planet. That is not a small pattern. That is a planetary one. And 43,200 itself is not a meaningless number. It is the count of seconds in 12 hours. It is linked to the rhythm of time, to the rotation of the Earth, to the daily cycle of light and darkness. So when that same number appears as the bridge between the monument and the planet, the coincidence starts to look like a message. And the machine, which has no reason to be impressed, and no reason to be afraid of sounding strange, treated it that way. The standard explanation says these relationships are just artifacts of measurement numbers that appear if you look hard enough at a large structure. But the AI was doing exactly that, and what it kept finding was too consistent, too layered, too deliberate to dissolve into randomness. Leveling more precise than modern tolerance. Orientation tighter than practical necessity. P hidden in the proportions. Phi encoded in multiple dimensions. Earth-scale relationships folded into the height and base through 43,200. Each of those findings alone could be argued away. Together, they begin to look like a coherent signature. And that is why the machine reached the conclusion it did. It did not name aliens. It did not name Atlantis. It did not claim a lost continent or a secret civilization with absolute certainty. It did something quieter and in a way more unsettling. It judged the conventional explanation insufficient. Not completely false. Insufficient. That means the standard story may explain the labor, the organization, the workers, the food, the records, the logistics. But it does not fully explain the precision. It does not fully explain the mathematics. It does not fully explain why the dimensions seem to mirror the Earth itself. And once that gap appears, you are left with four possibilities. A lost Egyptian technology that was later forgotten. Inherited knowledge from a civilization older than the dynasties. A global Ice Age civilization that was erased and only fragments survived. Or something that was never human at all. The AI did not choose among them. It could not. That would be speculation. What it did was expose the gap between what the monument is and what the usual explanation can comfortably contain. And that gap is the mystery. Because the Great Pyramid is not just a tomb-shaped block of stone. It is a challenge to our assumptions. It challenges what we think ancient builders could measure. It challenges what we think they could know. It challenges when we think mathematics was understood. It challenges whether history is complete or whether we are still missing something fundamental. The machine did not tell us to reject archaeology. It did not tell us to ignore evidence. It did not erase the work of scholars, engineers, or historians. It simply revealed that the accepted explanation is too small for the full set of numbers. And once you see that, the monument changes in your mind. It stops looking like only a construction project. It starts looking like a message, a record, a code in stone, a statement from a time that may know more than we give it credit for. That is why the pyramid keeps haunting people. Not because of myth, not because of fantasy, but because the data refuses to stay ordinary. So here is the question I want you to answer. If you ignore what you were taught in school and look only at the stone, the leveling, the alignment, the pi, the phi, and the earth folded into the pyramid's proportions, which of the four possibilities do you actually believe? Forgotten Egyptian technology? Inherited knowledge from a lost culture? An Ice Age civilization erased from the record? Or something that was never human at all? Tell me which one you would defend, and tell me why. Because somewhere else, the same fingerprint is already beginning to appear again. And once you notice it here, you stop seeing the Great Pyramid as the end of the story. You start seeing it as the beginning.